Welcome back to Room 1-on-1 from the Homeboys. Another different one and another 1-on-2 as we have two guests today. Well, one guest and the famous Jason Higgins has joined me for Sonny Wishaw. Well, Jabo, how are you, pal?
I'm good, mate. How are you, Scott?
I'm okay. Right, so our guest today, no stranger to be involved in the politics of following and supporting Celtic. I'm delighted to have my fellow Celtic Fans Collective member, Paul Quigley. So, well, Paul, how are you, pal?
I'm good, Scott, mate. How are you getting on?
Yes, I'm doing all right, mate. Right. So what the basis of this is we want to talk about the meeting that happened at Celtic Park between Celtic and Police Scotland and yourself, Paul, at the start of this month. However, I think it's only fair to stick some meat in the bone, right? So I want to have a wee chat about what happened. So it was March of this year. Celtic supporters were kettled by Police Scotland, who enabled an order under Section 60 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act of 1994 to contain groups of fans ahead of the game against Rangers at Celtic Park. Now, the reason given, I believe, was because of the increased security. Was that this was the first time since the 2017-18 season over 2,000 away fans were allocated tickets. Now, considering we used to have fucking 7,000 away fans, I'm a wee bit perplexed by the whole thing. Now, before we get Paul on to discuss the meeting and basically what happened on the day, Jason, you were actually walking by and you kind of witnessed the start of this. So, for your memory, what do you remember happened that day in March?
Aye. So, how you doing, Paul? You all right, mate? Good to have you on.
I'm good, mate. I was actually trying to think of the last time I was on here before I joined. It must be a few years, but it's good to be back on, mate.
Nice one, mate. Nice one. Aye. So I was in the supporters bus, and me, my daughter, and a load of my mates, and I had a load of guys there for Bilbao for the game. So we were on the supporters bus just as normal, and then 74 cut off, get a bit. I don't know, quarter of a mile up London Road and then just had a standstill and nobody knew what was going on. So sat on the bus for 10, 15 minutes and it was quite obvious that nothing was moving, like you weren't even crawling, it was a total standstill. So this was getting to, try to think back, was it a midday kickoff? It probably would have been 12, half 12 kickoff. So this would have been probably 11 in the morning or whatever. And so we've all just got off the bus and we've started walking up. So as we're walking by like the whiskey place, it was quite evident there was a load of police cars and stuff in front of us. So we just kept walking up, and as we get closer to the Supporters Association, it was clear that there was a group of individuals all kettled in the middle of the road with the police guarding them or and about them. So my timeline might be, I think actually maybe we stayed in the bus longer because this would only have been maybe half an hour, 45 minutes before the game. So I was like, what's going on here? And I said to the police, and I says, what's going on here? Just move, usual shite, beat it and all that. And then I seen a couple of folk I knew in the kettle, and obviously I was asking what was going on, and they weren't even kind of allowed to talk. You weren't even allowed to go and speak to them. So I was like, fucking hell. So we just kept walking basically to the game. We kept looking back and nothing was happening. So that's all really I can add to it. As I say, I just seen the police kettling them, and the amount of police there was absolutely ridiculous. And the age groups, what was there was from kids younger than 10 up until people in their 50s and 60s. So it was a wide range, and it wasn't all just like Green Brigade members. I think it was anybody that was in the vicinity at that time had all been corralled into, and in the middle of the road, stopping every bit of traffic going towards the game. So anything that was on London Road just wasn't moving. So you had to get out. So I don't know how they manoeuvred the buses, etc., to get where they were going to go to, and I don't know how long that took. But as I say, we hightailed it to the game, but that's really all the colour I can add to it, Scott, because obviously found out later on.
It gives a good context that, as you said, it wasn't just like your usual ultra group. It was basically anybody who was at the association. Now, Paul, we'll bring you in now. You've got actually, you were in the stadium till half time, I think. So you tell us what happened in your situation.
So I had just got into the game, mate. So like I get my bus in. I guess like maybe in years gone by, I might have headed on to the club for a couple of beers or whatever before the game. But kind of recent years, I've kind of go on my supporters bus into Celtic Park, and usually as well, I'd probably, especially a game like that, you kind of get in early. Usually I'd kind of milled about outside, see people, and you kind of get caught up with folk and whatever. I remember getting there and kind of needing a piss, so I never even waited about. Like I kind of went right into the ground. I hadn't really noticed that, at the standing section, everything was, it must have been really quiet. And it was when I was coming back out the toilet, I kind of bumped into a pal of mine who was the group is just being kettled out in London Road. I was like, okay, but even at that point, it was maybe, I don't know, I mean, you're going back to February, March now, it's a long time, but even at that point, it was maybe an hour before kick-off, I think. So in my head, I'm like, they'll just be kind of waiting for something to happen or whatever, and then they're going to let the boys in. I bumped into a couple of boys, kind of members of the Green Brigade, and I was asking them, and they were saying, look, the kind of text messages we are getting are, the police are going to kind of move the Union Bears on, they've got them down another road or whatever, and then they're just going to let them in. So I kind of went up, and you're kind of waiting on the kind of cavalry arriving, you know what I mean, and getting the crowd going. Obviously, it's a derby game, but the longer it goes on, the closer you're getting to kick-off, the less there's no movement, there's no change. You know what it's like as well, particularly as you're getting to kick-off and the crowd's full. The signal on your phone is kind of non-existent, you know what I mean? So you're trying to figure out what's going on. And at that point, the kind of message that seemed to be coming through. So I'm not involved with the Green Brigade, but I do stand in the section, and the kind of word we were getting was, look, everybody's going to get in. It's just a case of waiting for whatever it is the police want, and then bodies will start coming in. And obviously the game, the game itself turns into a bit of a disaster. You know what I mean? They go 2-0 up as well, relatively early on. Jesus Christ, this isn't the day that I had envisaged when I woke up. You know what I mean? I thought give Barry Ferguson and co a bit of a shoe in our back garden, and it was kind of falling apart a wee bit. And again, we were kind of the kind of boys at I stand. We still kind of hopeful that stuff's going to move, boys are going to get in, and we can kind of, everybody can kind of rally the crowd, rally the team for the second half. But at half time, the kind of message was, not only is the group and those caught up in this kettle, because Jason's right, it was a kind of, it wasn't just ultras, it wasn't just the Green Brigade, it was a real mix in there. When it became apparent that they were being held and might be held way past the game finishing, it's like, I've probably got a bit of a responsibility to head out and go and see if I can help or see what's going on or whatever. So I left at half time and went over to see what was happening, and kind of I probably came up on it for the other side of Jason, and just seeing the kind of mad police presence, just how many of them, and immediately was kind of met with the hostility by officers who were immediately really aggressively with us, even though we clearly had nothing to do with the kettle, clearly had nothing to do with anything that they felt justified for them doing that, but they were wound up that day, and they were clearly on a bit of a mission to target supporters, and it not only damaged for me, it obviously was a really terrible experience for anybody caught up in it. But again, this was a game of football that was very much on an ice edge. I know that, as I say, the team didn't start very well the first half, but they came back into it, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I'd imagine for people who go and give their all in that standing section, one of the reasons they do it is because they think that, whether people agree with it or no, but they do genuinely think that it has an impact, that it can help the team, that if the section can get the crowd going, that momentum can genuinely translate onto the park. And as I say, that was a game on an ice edge, but without backing, without that sort of driving force to help lift the atmosphere. We go and get beat 3-2, and it was just a kind of a really miserable day all round. I mean, just getting back to the house and just thinking, Christ, like, I can't imagine how that could have gone any worse. You know what I mean? So it was a bad one from start to finish.
You talked to, I mean, my own experience of that, I remember the day was, like you said, you're sitting there, you're 4 minutes in, you're a goal down, there's no GB, the usual fucking atmosphere is kind of halved. I mean, the boys are doing a bit, but you're sitting there going, what the fuck is going on? Do you know what I mean? And a lot of people are like, usual gossip and all that, the Green Brigade have spat the dummy, they're not coming. And then, as you say, all the texts all started coming in. They've kettled a whole bunch of people down there and stuff. You're like, what the fuck is happening? And again, but you touched on it there. You says the police, they were almost out to prove a point that day. They were given these powers that they haven't had, right? And we'll come to the powers soon enough. But you yourself, you say, did you eventually, as you came down, right? Because your history, like the Fans Against Criminalisation, and you're there to kind of help, even diffuse the situation somewhat. Did you just meet aggression straight away? I mean, did you end up kind of part of it at that point?
I didn't end up part of the kettle, so because there's the kettle's kind of in the middle of the road, right? Mm-hmm. Also, there's those kind of metal barriers, and you're talking 2 or 3 coppers deep as well, like circling the kind of group of bodies. My first thing was to go up and kind of ask, look, what's going on? Trying to be like, and I could see John Paul Taylor on the other side, and he'd obviously been trying to do the same thing. But again, there was like, it didn't seem to me like the posts were terribly interested in engaging with anyone, outside of that. And kind of one story, I actually ended up in the meeting minutes for the meeting we'll go on to talk about. I ended up kind of thinking, right, I'm not going to be able to kind of, it doesn't look as though there's any mediation to be kind of had here. It doesn't look like this is going to be resolved by any magic set of words. So I kind of thought, like, in my head, I was like, the best thing for me to do is just kind of stand up, kind of watch what's going on, maybe get some footage and see how this plays out.
Right.
So there's obviously the big kind of grass verge bit, like just off London Road down for the club. And I've kind of stood up on there so I could get a wee bit of a vantage point. And I've not really been paying that much attention. And a copper he'd obviously confiscated this, like a kind of 6-pack or whatever, or a few beers, like cans of beers off somebody, in the kettle or outside, I don't know. And it was almost as if he made a beeline to like fans standing separate and came over and like tried to pour the beer on our feet. And then when he get a reaction, he get told to get to, he immediately starts trying to grab people, threatening to arrest them. You're like, mate, like, are you having a laugh? Like what is, like, and that's like a really small, minor point. It's nothing compared to what people, who are part of it went through, and some of the other stories that have come through in terms of, witness statements and so on. But it's a very minor thing. I think to me, it immediately kind of signalled, like there's no talking to these people today. They're out to antagonise, they're out to cause bother, and the best thing we can do is a support, is look out for each other and try and get everybody up the road without anybody getting arrested and scapegoated.
But to that point there, right, he's got 6 beers that are obviously nothing to do with you or anybody that's standing with you because you're no part of the kettle, and he's come out to antagonise you, to pour it out in front of you, nearly on your feet. And then when you have a reaction to that, he's there insinuating he would maybe start arresting you. And you're like, and what part of the world is that normal?
Bizarre. Like, it was bizarre. But like, again, you speak to people who were there on the day, as I say, you read some of the witness statements that were gathered in, including some of the stuff that's included in the appendices of the Fairhurst inquiry itself. You can see that one kind of common theme that comes through is the police or some specific police officers like going out of their way to encourage people, doing those types of things that maybe they had enough to that, something like that, right? I'm sure if you asked that police officer, he would have probably said that I was just pouring it in the grass. some that just had enough deniability that they could defend themselves, but also knowing that they're pushing the envelope to try and wind people up, try to get a reaction, and try and give them a bit of justification for potentially starting to grab people and fling them in the van.
Fucking madness. So a lot of the guys who were planning to kind of march up to the ground, you'd say they were there maybe an hour and a half, certainly an hour before the game, and then you include the 2 hours of the game itself. I was led to believe that people were kettled for about 5 hours. Is that right?
Aye, that seems to be the aye. From start to finish, it was about 5 hours.
You think about. I put it out there for anybody who wasn't involved in it and stuff like that. You think how long when you're after a European game and they keep you in the ground for half an hour, and how long that seems. Imagine stoning in a kettle for 2 hours. 2 hours, and I'm led to believe that some fans were trying to come up. Some other Celtic fans were trying to come up and help people out and kind of give them some liquids and some ginger and stuff like that. And the coppers were having none of that either.
Aye, so again, even speaking to people who working at pubs, or people were going and trying to buy stuff at shops to hand in water, juice, kind of provisions just to kind of help people. And again, the kind of reports suggest that the police not only wouldn't help, but actively knocked that back. And you make a point about it being 5 hours. Like, it being 5 hours is bad enough, right? I can't imagine how brutal that would be, especially during a big game, and you can still hear the crowd. You're only half a minute, you can hear the shouts and whatever. But on top of that, it's 5 hours not knowing when it's going to end. It only comes to an end when it gets to that point, but you don't actually know. When is that going to come? What is it going to take? Are they going to start grabbing bodies? Again, the Celtic support as well, not just the ground brigade, but the wider fan base has got a sort of imprinted memory of police mistreatment going back over the last 10, 15 years. And I think if I was in that kettle, that containment, I would be thinking back to some of these incidents, like at the Gallagate. Like when they, in my view, contributed to a near crushing incident on Greenfield Street, like to, the different times that they've arrested fans for very little. Your mind starts connecting these dots. So, it's not just that you're standing there for 5 hours bored and wanting it to come to an end. You're standing there for 5 hours wondering, am I going to get to jail? Am I going to make work tomorrow? What's my missus going to think? Am I going to, all these different permutations for your life? And again, I understand for people listening to this, they'll maybe have that thing of, it's a Green Brigade, it's ultras, and that sort of what happens to that type of fan. But again, I've been around, you kind of alluded to it, through Fans Against Criminalisation. I've helped out, I don't know how many supporters of Celtic and other clubs who've been, targeted by the police, who've been arrested, who've been thrown through the courts. And the one thing they all have in common is nobody woke up that day, went to a game thinking that would happen to them. Nobody thinks it's going to be them until it is them. So it was no doubt a horrible experience for the supporters caught up. But I also think that Celtic supporters across the board and supporters of Scottish football beyond that have a kind of responsibility to not only to oppose it, but also even just through sheer, for sheer selfish reasons, because quite easily that could have been anybody else who'd bus maybe just stopped in at the club that day and decided to walk behind the group, and all of a sudden they're caught up in it as well, and that's happened a lot. So it was a really horrible thing for people to have went through.
There's loads that happened that day that we could, I'm sure we could do another podcast just talking about what happened that day and kind of the shite that people had to put up with. So, but we'll move on, because I want to kind of keep on about the meeting. So, as the club have done before, the club instructed independent specialist Fairhurst, hence the name of the reports, to conduct a review of what happened that day. Now, we've previously engaged Fairhurst to conduct a similar report. Paul, you just spoke about it, and that was the crush under the North Stand in September 2018. The scope instructed to Fairhurst this time is to review the concerns voiced to the club events involving the Celtic Supporters Club and buses and groups which took place from Celtic Park on the 16th of March 2025, taking possession of supporters' feedback already provided, offering an opportunity for other supporters persons who have not already provided feedback on the event of the day to do so, reviewing and collating open source anecdotal information relating to events for that day, and collating and reviewing all feedback received and all that, blah, 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 usual. So basically we've kind of challenged Fairhurst to go and do this report. As I did mention, we've used Fairhurst in the past, and it would have been that crushing thing that you talked about in Janefield under the Celtic North stand. Now, I actually had a wee look at that because I don't think I looked at it at the time, and the common reports for everybody present was how aggressive the fucking police were that day to people's demands. So it kind of touches on, I mean, it's wrote down in black and white. Anybody can go and look at it. Police Scotland's attitude to football fans in general, but we're talking about Celtic fans, seems to be one of very negative and very confrontational at all times. So I mean, it kind of leads into it. Anyway, the review was passed to the club on the 26th of September this year. I thought it funny that Celtic had says when they were doing the report that they had nothing to do with anything because it was away from the ground. Right, so they says, while events away from Celtic Park are not in any way managed by the club, we play no role in operational policing decisions outside our stadium. We recognise that many supporters had turned to the club to voice their concerns regarding the events of 16th of March. I will come to that statement. But anyway, all major supporter bodies at this point who joined the collective received an invitation by the club to jointly release the report. Now, Paul, if you go back to it, us in the collective unanimously decided to reject going to that meeting. Can you tell us why we came to that decision?
Well, I think that was obviously coming right off the back of the transfer window. And as the kind of collective was formed, around about that time as well, you're seeing even the kind of major fan associations who, I don't think they'd mind me saying, have tended to be kind of less critical of the club comparative to others, and that's absolutely fine. But even these organisations were having votes of no confidence in those who were leading the club. And I think that from a kind of collective perspective, from a fan organisation perspective, kind of the discussion was like, this can't just be business as usual, you know, like you know, particularly off the back of the defeat to Kyrat, the kind of fanning about that occurred at the end of the transfer window, the kind of absolute unavoidable truth that we are not run as a proper football club was so apparent to every single demographic of the support that the collective had formed and tried to build a kind of unified front to kind of make these points. And it was kind of felt that, see, regardless of what the topic was, whether it was the Kettling, whatever it might have been, you know, other organisations would have, you know, their own reasons to get in and meet with the club about different issues. But it was kind of felt that, no, like, what is important here is that we send a kind of clear message as a collective that this can't be business as usual. We cannot allow, you know, the club to keep making these mistakes in terms of its football operations and, you know, related to its fan engagement strategies and whatever. So at that point, the kind of the focus was much more on how can we try and drive change and send a message that this just can't continue. Sound.
Right, I'm going to ask you another one. So the report was made public, as I said, on the 26th of September. Mm-hmm. Now, you've obviously got rattled in about it. What was your initial thoughts reading the report?
So, what strikes you, or what struck me, was just it was by its kind of nature very passive. You know, very kind of neutral. And I'm not going to have a go at the kind of people who done the report and conducted the kind of gathered the research and then presented the data. What it struck me is it's like part of my job as an academic, so I understand being on the other side of that. But what to me is that there's kind of two different ways that you can do something like this. One of it can be that you try and ascertain the facts and then present an analysis on what you think happened, drawing on points of evidence and coming to conclusions, or what you can instead do is to just take the evidence and just sort of present it. That's what the inquiry done, of the report done. Sorry, it doesn't make any kind of commentary on how the police behaved. It doesn't make any kind of evaluation of where the powers used appropriate. It doesn't really offer any of that. What it really just does is here's what fans have said. Here's the kind of summary of supporter views. And here's the evidence around what people think. And one thing, and I know we'll come on to it, mate, so I don't want to jump the gun too much, but one thing that I did think when I was sitting in the meeting with the Polish and Celtic, and going through some of these questions, and the Polish have been asked to answer them, part of me was thinking, why were the Polish not asked these questions before the report was published? Why were they not asked to answer them as part of that process? You know what I mean? So that the report can then make a judgment on, this is what people have said, this is what the Polish have said, where is the truth likely to lie? So the kind of nature of it looked to me as though the way it was commissioned, what this consultancy group was asked to do was really just gather in the witness statements, gather in people's views, and then put that in a document in a way that people can read and understand. But it wasn't asking them to take a position. It wasn't asking them to evaluate it. And then the club statement, kind of mirrored that passivity. Really mirrored that neutrality. And I know that people were probably just underwhelmed as much as anything else by it all.
That's exactly my take on it for reading it, was you've just fucking took all the information and put in a document. You've not given me any summary, you've not given me any evaluation. You basically went, this happened, they said this, they said that. What kind of fucking report's that? I mean, but
aye, so to me, there should have been a list of questions, and without even knowing what the facts are, there should be a list of standard questions that they should have had to answer. Like, did you think the force was adequate to what you were facing? X, Y, Z. But you could have got 20 questions and said to them, could you answer these questions, please?
I think as well that I don't know if the part of my thinking the way that the club deals with these types of issues, including the Janefield Street thing, going back to that, or the Gallagher incident in 2013 or any other, the club I think the sort of natural reaction is to try and play for time, to try to kick it down the road long enough that other issues come up. You know what it's like for Wednesday. I mean, this season, as much as anything, there's been an issue, a new drama every single week. And the hope would be that eventually the supporter just sort of forget about it and move on. And I think that under other circumstances, that might have been what happened. See if we went and, beat Kyra and kind of Brendan Rodgers was still in charge and we were maybe no great, but, comfortably ahead in the league and whatever, then this issue might have been allowed to have kind of drop off the kind of radar of most supporters. But see, within the context of the way things have went, whereby, the football has been really up and down all season, there's been significant critique of the way that the club has been run. There's been uproar across the place about the way that they treat and engage with supporters. And then I think the fact that it's been timed in the midst of that has meant that they've not really had that opportunity to just hide for cover and wait it out. And that's why, they've even still, they're still trying to delay having to take any sort of position. And I think that's generally their tactic.
Aye, we've seen that fucking, as you say, many a time on many a subject. Huh? Right, so on Monday the 6th of October, the Celtic Fans Collective, in good faith, attended a meeting at Celtic Park. We've all kind of heard, I think we all know what happened there that night, shrug of the shoulders, exact. But the collective raised their concerns over the Fairhurst report. It was one of the 7 original questions. But and the club revealed they were going to be having a meeting with Police Scotland to discuss the report and findings. Paul, that's where you got involved, but I'm led to believe you never had a choice in it.
Were you there that night, Scott? I can't remember.
No, I wasn't there, mate.
No, right, okay. So obviously that night was a bit of a listen, it's been on record, it was a bit of a shit show. There wasn't an awful lot achieved for it, whatever. But I can't even mind, obviously you're going back a few months now or whatever, when it kind of got to that point, and it wasn't that long after the report had been released, and one of the members of the collective, who you'll both know, I'll not name him and shame him, but partway through the meeting he was kind of talking about, he's making similar points to what I've said about the kind of passivity, the kind of neutrality of the kind of language compared to the way the club responds to, its own supporters in other contexts. And he was kind of making the point of what's the follow-up, what's going to happen next with this? You've commissioned this. Is that it? What he's going to do about it? And I can't mind if it was Nicholson or Mackay that made the point of, we've got this meeting set up with Police Scotland in December.
The minute says Hargreaves.
Was it right? Okay, I couldn't mind, but fair dues. At which point, this member of the collective turns around and says, I think that you've a responsibility to allow a fan representative in, and I think it should be Paul Quigley. And I'm sitting there going, you could have fucking run that by me. Just like, obviously I can't say that in front of the full meeting. He just stuck me in it. I'm thinking, I'm meeting with the Celtic board and Police Scotland. I can't imagine a room in Scotland in which I would be less popular, to be honest. But I was like, right, okay. Well, I mean, I didn't have a choice at that point. I couldn't turn around and say no. But even then, in that, from that point of October to now, up to a week and a bit ago, in that 2 months again, kind of getting back to the point I made, it's been a long old season already. It feels like we've had 5 seasons in one, the amount of issues and conflict and different stuff that's cropped up. So even in that time, you've obviously had the Green Brigade getting banned. You've had, for me, the collective being targeted. Even recently now, we're seeing, fan media, fan podcasts being targeted. So the context for it was quite different. You're getting out of a situation whereby you're getting in and sitting with people who are, actively targeting Celtic supporters, and I didn't really, I have to admit, I didn't feel comfortable with that at all. It wasn't something that I was keen, we can laugh and joke, but it honestly wasn't something I was keen to do. And on the Thursday, the Friday or whatever, the week before, I was kind of saying, you might have remembered, Scott, in the collective chat, I was a little bit like, look, what's your stance in this? I wouldn't do it for the greater. If people want me to do it, I'll do it. But I'm not. Again, it kind of comes back to that point that we made earlier about I don't really want this to be like business as usual with these people, whilst they're doing all this against supporters. And I was really hesitant, mate. I'm not going to lie. I kind of prepared a bit over the weekend, tried to get myself in a space to do it, but I really didn't want to do it. And then the night before, so the collective had emailed Celtic, I think on the 17th of September, to just say...
to put a time on it, Paul, they replied to us on the 12th of November, agreeing that you were going to represent the Celtic fans, and then the kind of the date had come out when it was going to be, and then we'd actually emailed them back confirming your attendance, and then as you said, we were looking for an additional member of the collective to go to at least take minutes. I think that was it. And that was on the 17th of November, right?
I said September then, I meant to say November. So my understanding was we had another representative who had been there all day, who represented the Celtic Supporters Association, which is still, in terms of number, probably the largest fan organisation around Celtic, not associated with the Green Brigade, and it was felt that would be a good kind of person to have along. And again, even with the practicalities of kind of taking notes and just evening up numbers, that seemed like a kind of fair, request or whatever. It wasn't really something that I think anybody thought any more of, to be honest. It certainly wasn't something I thought about much. And then the night before, we get an email at like 6 o'clock or whatever it was saying, no, it can only be one attendee. And you know, it's funny, it was when that email came in that I thought, oh no, actually, like I definitely do need to be there, or somebody, doesn't need to be me, like, but somebody 100% needs to be at that meeting, because as I say, I was a bit like, I don't know that we should do it. I don't know that I definitely knew I didn't want to do it. But my kind of thinking was, I wasn't too sure on what the benefit would be. But see, when that email came in, what it kind of communicated to me was, the way I took it was, they are doing that deliberately to try and make us pull back. They've timed it to like piss us off, similarly to how they handled the AGM, the Ross Desmond statement and whatever. They're trying to provoke, they're trying to antagonise, in the hope that we kind of go, you know what, we can engage with this in good faith, these are at it. And actually, it made me think, oh no, 100% somebody needs to be in that room to hold them to account. So it's, funnily enough, as I say, I was a wee bit more on the fence, but as soon as that happened, I was like, right, okay, practicalities will not be easy, you know, trying to do it yourself, trying to kind of manage, you know, the not just the discussion, but taking notes and try to make sure that you're doing your best to kind of back up fans and put across the right arguments and whatever. But that if there wasn't somebody there to do that, then the likelihood is the club would have been quite happy to have listened to the police's version of the story and closed the book on it, and just moved on. So as much as that was a frustrating email to get, it probably helped us actually think, no, this is what we need to do.
Fair play to you, Paul, you know, and I was out eating the dog a drink there, so I couldn't really answer back. But when obviously they put your name forward, personally I couldn't think of anybody better to do it. And you're obviously an academic yourself, so you're versed on the way to deal with certain situations where somebody would get tongue-tied, would maybe go down a rabbit hole the wrong way. So you're looking at it objectively, and you're obviously going in to face a hostile environment from Celtic and from the police. You know, there's no going to be a friendly face for you in that room whatsoever. You know, so as I say, fair play to you, mate. That's off to you.
Nah, cheers, mate. But I don't know. I didn't really. In terms of like, there definitely wasn't a friendly face, but and I didn't expect it to be one. You know what I mean? For me, like,
John Paul Taylor no been in it again, kind of just lying in it.
Like, I've got a lot of time for John Paul. I'm sure we all do.
Yeah.
And for me, like, it so significantly undermines his position. Mm-hmm. And again, I think it tells you what they think about us as a support, because John Paul, that is literally what he's paid for. He's paid to represent us as supporters. He's the voice of the fans inside the ground, inside that stadium. And when you have an issue like this, that's obviously completely situated in the realm of supporter engagement, supporter treatment, whatever else, how you can have that meeting without having John Paul Taylor there, it's an absolute disgrace. It is shocking. But again, I think part of it was, I think there was twofold. I think that they actively attempt to just cut John Paul out of a lot of this. And I also think, again, part of it was to kind of make the collective not want to go ahead with it, or for me to feel a bit uncomfortable in there, which again speaks to where it is now, you know, how bad it's got.
They hate us. They hate their own support. It's quite hard to actually put into words, but it's beyond belief how bad it's got between the people that are running our club and the fans. And you just say to yourself, why? I mean, anybody running any business, your customer base is paramount to the success of that business. Every business. But they treat us with absolute disdain. And we absolutely love the club blind. And it just beggars belief. You say, why do they do it? What do they gain out of it? It's incredible.
that's it, mate. Like I've made this point before, but like no other business would do it. But like if Tesco treated you like that, you'd shop Mazda. You know what I mean? But we say like you don't have that option. You know, like you're tied for life. That emotional tie. They treat us like addicts because we are. You know, like that's why we put up with it and we go back for more and more. And I do think that they just hold us in contempt. And even if I thought that maybe before I got into the meeting, certainly by the time I came out, it was confirmed.
So, 11 o'clock, Celtic Park on the 2nd of December, you headed up, you're on your Todd with your wee notepad under your arm, and you went into a meeting. And if I'm wrong in these names, let me know, mate. But on behalf of Celtic, there was Michael Nicholson, George Campbell, and Mark Hargreaves.
Yeah.
And for Police Scotland, there was Emma Croft and Derek Johnson. Was there another one there?
So in terms of again, I'd maybe need to check, but in terms of the emails we had been sent to the collective, they had, I'm sure they had initially said there was going to be 2 police officers, Emma Croft and Derek Johnson. There was a third one there. I'm sure his name was Stevie. But again, I'm trying to take notes. I'm trying to capture everything. So I didn't get that, which is why on the meeting notes I've not even got this guy's surname. But again, it's difficult, man. You know, like again. Even the fact that they added on an extra police officer after telling us we couldn't have 2 fans, they've now got 3 police. Again, part of me wonders, was that part of the tactic? Was that another thing? I don't know that, but there was 3 of them, and they all kind of took different turns at having a wee go, to be honest.
Right, well, let's go for it. What happened?
I mean, what I would say is I probably had a bit of an idea in my mind about, you know, trying to kind of prepare for it beforehand, a bit of an idea about how it might play out. But Michael Nicholson kind of chaired it, you know, himself, and he had a kind of series of questions. It was based on the report itself. So if you go to one of the appendices, it lays out like a kind of table of questions and themes, and Nicholson and Mark Hargreaves kind of outlined those as from memory. There was 10 questions and 4 kind of broad themes that they wanted to run through kind of point by point, asking questions of the police, and obviously I would be allowed at different, well, not allowed, but I would kind of come in and kind of make rebuttals or points or whatever. And my kind of thinking was, I'm going to try and you boys know me, it doesn't come all that naturally to me. I'm going to try and get in and be really quiet and try and just, like, at the start, see how it kind of plays out, see what the kind of approach is. And again, Michael Nicholson, to be fair, he did open, you know, by making the point that one thing he said repeatedly was that the club had concerns following, you know, like receiving fan feedback and complaints via email and whatever. He said that the club had concerns, I think 2 or 3 times within his kind of short opening, and was kind of making the point of they want to get answers and they want to kind of improve engagement and stop it happening again and blah blah blah. So I was quite keen to see, you know, to what extent are you know, this kind of representatives of Celtic Football Club. What extent are they going to try and actually hold the police to account? How are they going to approach it? And we spoke about the kind of really neutral, passive language that was found in the report. That then became, you know, the exact sort of tone and approach of Michael Nicholson and Mark Hargreaves. To a lesser extent, he didn't say quite as much in terms of as they started to kind of talk and go through the questions. And immediately, the kind of first point became about the Section 60 powers themselves, right? Specifically on the way in which the police would go about applying for them ahead of time, because again, you boys will maybe remember that it was announced the night before the match that the police were being granted these emergency powers that they could utilise if they needed to. So the kind of opening discussion was about, why did they need these extra powers? How did they go about getting them? What's the kind of process? Keeping in mind that, that other than a game 2 weeks prior between Hibs and Hearts, these powers hadn't been applied for and used within the context of football, in going back years, potentially decades. Nobody in the room, including myself, could remember the last time it had happened. So a lot of the discussion was about where did this come from, what was the kind of point, what was the thought process, and at which point, again, I'm trying to be quiet at the start, and the police are going on about that they'd had this intelligence that told them that it was going to be required, that they had analysed these patterns and blah blah blah, and they kept on talking about the intelligence that they had. And it was kind of at that point I was like, I can't really sit and listen to this, I can have a responsibility to push back on some of it, and I was kind of making the point of like, what do you mean by intelligence? Like, can you tell us a little bit more? And they resisted that a little bit at first, just saying, look, they can't tell us everything, but their kind of intelligence told us. And I was, my obvious retort to that was that, just citing unspecified intelligence was never going to be an adequate explanation to Celtic supporters. And at which point they kind of moved on to then talk about specifically the kind of incident that happened before the cup final at Hampden, the December before, so maybe 3 months before, 2-3 months before, when there had been a bit of a there had been a bit of a kind of incident at Argyle Street on the morning of that match. Now, taking that incident aside, the kind of point I was making was that disorder before a game at Hampden, when, to the best of from what I seen, it looked as though the police, were either side of both of those supporters groups that day as well, and it looked as though the police had made a bit of a mess of it. But if you take that incident aside, that game at Hampden is an entirely different context to a match at Celtic Park. Again, I was asking the question on when was the last time that any disorder anywhere near that level was seen at Celtic Park before a derby match, between Celtic and Rangers. And again, nobody was able to give any sort of response on any time. The police kind of implicitly acknowledged that hadn't really been the case in recent decades. And again, so I was kind of making the point of like the Ground Brigade, for example, typically leave the Celtic Supporters Club. I wouldn't say every game, but I would say probably most game back, I don't know, maybe the last 10 years or so. I would say that most home games between Celtic and Rangers, the Ground Brigade have left the Supporters Club and walked down to Celtic Park. And never once has it led to any disorder. Never once has it led to any incident of note whatsoever. So if their analysis of intelligence and patterns of behaviour is telling them that all of a sudden this is a significant risk, I just don't really buy it, and I don't think that most other supporters will. I think that it's kind of detached from the reality of actual fan experience, and that was when we then started to go into some other element. I'm saying that this went back and forth for a wee while, kind of debating this and kind of pointing out these kind of different things. But the police's kind of argument was that they felt that they needed these powers because of this intelligence, these patterns that they were seeing, and they felt that it was necessary after that game before. And then it was funny when we were kind of talking about this, like the kind of Michael Nicholson was kind of really keen to keep it on the track, and was kind of 10 questions or so. And the kind of point the police kept making was around the fact that they kept on making the argument of we don't want to use them. We wanted them as a kind of last resort, a backup just in case. And then the discussion started to move on to, okay, well, you've the discussion moved on to what it was done in the day. But one other point I would want to make as well is that one thing that the club were kind of keen to push on was, in that process leading up to the Section 60 powers being applied for, where the club kind of involved in that, did they, or whatever, how much did they know? And I was asking specifically, would you have notified anyone at Celtic Football Club? And they were up to that. I'm sure it was Emma Croft who said that, and it wouldn't have been her. It was someone else in a similar position to her, said that that the kind of Celtic chief of security, which at the time was Ronnie Hawthorne, she said that he would almost certainly have been notified, but it would have been like a more informal conversation. It'd have been more like in passing. Like usually what they said was 6 weeks before one of these games is when they start the security preparations, you start getting things in place, we'll start having meetings and discussions and whatever. And she said that it wasn't like, if you're going to apply for these powers, you need to like formally notify the club, or you need to send a letter or an email. But given the kind of relationship, given that these kind of stakeholders need to work together, all the way throughout a season, that what would have happened is he would have been notified that this was being considered. The police would need to like submit a break of evidence, and then usually they would only be notified a few days before if those powers were going to be granted. And as much as Ronnie Hawthorne might not have passed that on or whatever, but she did make the point of that not only would he likely have known that was a possibility, but when I asked in that process then if Celtic Football Club, or any football club for that matter, were to oppose those powers being granted in relation to their supporters, in relation to a game being played by their club, would that be considered and possibly be used as a reason to not grant those powers? And she did say that that would be considered as part of the process. So for me, from a fan perspective, from a collective perspective, one thing that I would really like us to push and get out of this would be for Celtic to commit to having a default position of opposing Section 60 powers being granted to police unless there is absolutely overwhelming and specific evidence about why it would be needed on a certain game, rather than just pulling evidence from the ether about something that happened in a different context and suggesting that should therefore grant them these really extraneous powers forevermore. So for me, that was one of the kind of key points. Michael Nicholson was definitely keen at points as well to kind of ask about, well, did Celtic collude and did Celtic know that there was going to be fans kettled or whatever? And I do have to say the police were unequivocal that wasn't the case, because the police's argument was fundamentally that they didn't know that anyone was going to be kettled. Their argument was always, that this was a last resort. They were just using these because they were just applying for these powers because of these this intelligence that they built up. And it was only then when they seen or were informed about helicopter footage that showed fans behaving in a certain way behind the Celtic Supporters Club, that they then felt that they had to contain and fundamentally kettle. I mean, they pushed back on the word kettle, but I don't know what else you would get. For me, the people who experience it get to name it, not the people who do it. So I'm still going to call it a kettle. But what they were kind of what they were saying was it was only at that point that they or anyone else know that that's what they were going to do. And that moved on to the kind of discussion around, okay, we've kind of debated to death about applying for these powers. Was it proportionate? I didn't think so. They did. Okay, we're not going to square that circle. I got on to them talking about, okay, why did the kind of operational matters on the day? So why is it then that you've went from these are a last resort to enacting them, an hour and a half, whatever it was, before kickoff? And what they were saying was that they had got footage from a helicopter that showed people out the back of the Celtic Supporters Club, behaving in ways that they felt was kind of meant that they had a duty to the public to search, to stop and search between 20 to 30 people they had identified. And they were talking about how bad this footage was, right? It was kind of funny. Like, again, you've got to remember, I'm there to represent fans, and they're talking about how bad this footage is. And I'm also the only fan there, so I'm a bit like, I don't really know what I'm going to see here in this footage. I don't really know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
It took them forever and a day to get the footage to work. Like, it couldn't connect to the Wi-Fi, which is no surprise for the Celtic Park. And part of me was like, is this like a stitch-up? What, do they actually have you know what I mean? Like, are they just going to show like a buffered image and say, oh no, it doesn't work, but trust us, it was really bad. And I'm like, how am I going to, like, again, like, as much as you're there to represent fans, you're just a kind of normal guy. You're just trying to be like, I don't know how I'm going to respond to this, how I'm going to play it. And eventually, like, Celtic had to call on some wee guy for like their tech department or whatever. They come down and fix the Wi-Fi and get them hooked up. And eventually, after a lot of humming and hawing, the kind of video played. And I would say it was around about this point that it had went from being a bit contentious and not exactly easy going. Like, you know, the police weren't, you know, I wasn't thrilled to be sitting with three members of Police Scotland. They weren't thrilled to be sitting with me, but we were kind of getting through it. But when the footage was starting to come up, that's when it did get much more touchy. I felt they were much more defensive, much more aggressive, to be honest. I don't really have another word for it. I did think they were quite aggressive in their approach. And they started playing this footage. And again, you know, part of me is wondering, you know, is this going to be really bad? And then am I going to have to go back to people and say, actually, by the way, the post was really short. You know, like, I'm a bit, and then if I go back, all sorts of permutations are running through your mind, right? Because it's quite a pressured thing, given that no one else has seen it. Other people might still not see it, I don't know. So again, I'm just trying to keep my head kind of as level as I can and try and make a really honest assessment of what I see. And it goes round and it does show, you know, obviously it's from the kind of top down, so you can't see faces, but you can see the kind of bodies, you can see it as mostly guys in or around the Green Brigade, you know, like kind of relatively young demographic, but, you know, not exactly all teenagers, but, you know, so from sort of, I don't know, maybe 18-ish to kind of 30 years, whatever, and the kind of green jackets and whatever. And within that, you could see people going round, and the police, what they were adamant is that the footage showed evidence of people with offensive weapons, knives, and at this point they were saying knives plural. I remember taking a note of that specifically. One of them said knives plural anyway, and then the other thing was pyrotechnics. So I'm like, right, okay, I'm going to just need to watch it. And when the camera kind of zooming down a little bit and you can see a little bit more, firstly what you can see is you can see people putting stuff down like kind of up their jacket and kind of down their shorts and kind of pulling their jacket back over it. And I'm kind of looking at it and thinking, again, it's hard to see, right, because whatever height the camera would have been at, I'm looking at it and thinking, that doesn't look, we can't see definitively. But to me, it looked like kind of banners. That's what it looked like. People were doing. It looked like kind of poly banners that people were trying to, you know, either hide or take into or whatever, right? You could see others with what looked like pyrotechnics, but it wasn't many, and it wasn't terribly clear. It wasn't very obvious to me that was 100% the case. And then I was like, well, where's the, you know, what's this stuff about knives and whatever? Yep. And what ends up, there's a kind of big part at the kind of round the side and back of the club, and there's like a big flag, and the knives is some boy walking up and cutting the flag, and I'm like, surely that can't be what you're saying is like evidence of knife, because in my head I'm thinking, again, I'm not accusing the Green Brigade of doing this, I'm not saying that they ever would, but the way that it was presented to me was as if like these things were being like passed out to be like, you know, stuck down trousers and then snuck into the game or taken out in the street or whatever. That's what I was expecting. And then when I'm seeing someone using a knife for what it's kind of meant to be for, which is just cutting an everyday item, I'm a bit like, surely that can't actually be what you're talking about. Surely there's going to be more. And they're like, no, like that, you know, that's like an offensive weapon. And because we know that person has that, we have a responsibility to the public to stop and search, you know, that kind of group of 20 to 30 to find that weapon and those pyrotechnics. And I was kind of going on about the weapon. I was like, look, specifically around the knife, like it was being used, it was being used as a knife. It was being used to, you know, like cut a banner. That's what or a flag. That's what it was being used for. And I was like, is there any evidence that was attempted to take to the ground? And I remember one of the officers almost kind of scoffed at that question. And I was like, in all likelihood, that either went back into a car because there's lots of them parked in the area, or it's went back into a kind of local. But there's no evidence whatsoever that someone's attempted to take out a knife into the stadium. And one of the questions that we came on to, because obviously these groups of fans eventually did get searched, you know, 5 hours down the line, I did ask, like, how many fans were searched. And to be fair, they did give me a specific number. I can't remember it. Again, you're trying to manage this on your own. It's kind of difficult. It was between 150 and 200, but I can't remember the exact number. And I asked how many knives were found, and they went 0. And you're like, well, did that not kind of prove the point that I've been trying to make all along, that you've been sort of scoffing at, which is that actually, you know, like ultras who need to make massive banners, who take in all these different materials, who need to, you know, cut these different things and then put them back together and tie up different things, but actually having something like that and organising it before the game maybe isn't a sign of intent to go out and cause significant harm to the public, but is actually just more reflective of a relatively normal practice of them getting stuff organised for the game, and for whatever it was that they had planned.
What was their answer to that?
So again, like the kind of crux of this point was that they kind of kept coming to this idea that their view of public safety differed to mine. I was making a point of it just looked like an ultra cutting a flag to me, and for what reason I don't know. Like, I don't know why the person was cutting the flag. Again, whatever they were doing, I have no idea. But it wasn't. It absolutely wasn't the case of like someone handing out, you know, knives or some other weapon or whatever for the purpose of doing damage. It was just people, like one person cutting a flag and others just handing out things, most of which you couldn't really make out, you couldn't really see. And the other point I made was, okay, pyrotechnics are illegal, right? And people will have their own perspective on pyro games. It's a completely different debate. The point that I kept making was, again, the Green Brigade and other Celtic fans walk down to derby matches from that area of the city every single time Celtic play Rangers at Celtic Park. Happens every single time. In almost every occasion, you know, fans, including the times whereby the Green Brigade haven't even left there, there's still been masses of fans who left the Celtic Supporters Club, some of whom letting off pyrotechnics, right? And my argument was that in those circumstances, the police have typically taken a kind of pragmatic approach to policing, of accepting that, okay, they might not like the pyrotechnics, but the kind of common sense, safest thing to do is to just shepherd that crowd and just get them into the game. At which point, I remember Emma Croft took exception and was like, we would never think allowing pyrotechnics would be safe. I was like, right, okay, I'll reframe it. But you've at least taken the view that the most sensible way to manage this is to just get the crowd in, and focus on you know, trying to make sure that people just get into the game without any significant incident. But in this occasion, you've instead done something completely different. And from what I seen in the video, the only difference was someone walking up and kind of cutting a flag. And to me, that was just not justification for what the decisions that were taken and then what unfolded over the next 4 or 5 hours. And one thing you notice,
was it definitely a knife the guy was cutting the flag with? Was it easy?
it looked like it could have been a pair of scissors, mate. It could.
Aye.
I do think, like, I'll be honest, right? Again, I'm not here to just like completely paint a profile. Like, it did look like it was probably in it, but again, it was bein used to like cut a flag, like cut.
Aye. What a knife's meant to be used for, it's cutting.
Again, I don't know what the boys had in mind to do with the kind of holes in the flag or whatever, but that's no for me to make a judgment on. The only thing I could see was that was that it looked like a knife and it was being used to kind of cut something. I don't think that was justification for what happened. I think as well, you've got to again think about the ground brigade, right? And you think about how over-policed they are and how like stringent the searches are, how often they get stopped and harassed by police. Think about the fact that these guys would also have known that the Section 60 powers were in place the night before that allowed the police to randomly stop and search them without really much cause. Again, take all that into consideration. Like and I didn't make this point at the time. I kind of wish I did. But again, that to me tells me that the likelihood is that person, if they had a knife, if that's what it was, it probably did just get flung either in a car, into a pub, or even just flung in the bin if it was maybe just used for a single use. Like that. There is no way someone would have been daft enough to have taken that level of risk within the context of how fans are policed at football. So again, it was a frustrating debate. The police were getting extremely touchy at this point. And one thing you'll notice throughout all of this discussion, when I've been talking about all these kind of points we've been making back and forth, at no point have I mentioned Michael Nicholson, Mark Hart, Sir George Campbell, because they all sat largely completely silent, without any opinion to make, without any questions to push. And we make the point about me getting in and it being kind of 6-on-1. It wasn't. It was 3-on-1, and 3 who largely might not as well have been there.
And let's face it, if anybody's carrying a knife, they're bastards. Do you know what I mean? In any walk of life, if anybody's taken. But I get the fact that when you're dealing with banners, and some of the banners are extremely sophisticated and stuff like that. A knife is something that you would use to construct banners, in whatever context you're doing it. I think you would need scissors, knives, stuff. I don't know, right? But at the end of the day, if I knew somebody was carrying a knife, I'm happy for the police to arrest them and put them in jail in any context. If anybody's walking about streets with a knife, that's by the by. But in the context that you've mentioned here, it's in the construction of a banner at the back of the social club, and in no way would some of them be taking that to the football. And
the fact they didn't fucking find nothing. Christ.
Exactly.
As I say, like it was to kind of cut a flag up a wee bit, and whatever they were going to do with that, who knows? Why they were cutting it, whatever. And as I say, I don't really care. It's not anything. It's nothing to do.
It was for the purpose of a banner, right? It wasn't for the purpose of stabbing somebody or using it as a weapon. It was for the purpose of a banner.
And as I say, at the start, when it was kind of being discussed, the kind of point was almost like, or what I envisioned anyway, or what I thought it might have been. Actually, I'll take that back. It's not what I thought it might have been. It was the way that I felt the police were trying to put it across was almost as if these were like weapons being handed out, like lots of stuff going on in this video that demonstrated that the police had, in their words, no choice but to intervene. And then when you see it, as I say, it's someone cutting, and it did just look like one flag to me, cutting some whatever it was. And then, as I say, it looked to me like banners, like kind of small 2-stick style banners being put under people's, jumpers and whatever. It didn't look to me anywhere near enough to justify the police taking the steps that they did. And I think that was vindicated by the fact that they didn't actually find any of these things that they claimed that they were looking for.
Yeah.
Paul, you'd indicated to me that they'd previously used this Section 60 thing previously against Hibs fans, and you subsequently have spoke to Hibs fans about it, and I think they guys have kind of had to deal with this crap as well, eh?
Aye, so what I would say again, this was a kind of point I made as well, which is that they've had these Section 60 powers in place for 2 games within I think a 2-week period. I think Hearts played Hibs, I think 2 weeks to the day before we played Rangers. They had those Section 60 powers in place both days. And when I asked, so at one point I did ask was, so if it was intelligence and patterns of behaviour that, justified you applying for those powers in relation to the Glasgow derby, why did you apply for them, or why did Police Scotland broadly apply for them in relation to the Edinburgh derby? To which point they kind of said, again, they kind of hummed and hawed a little bit about intelligence, and when I pressed on that a little bit more, I'm not even going to, but they seemed to be, I didn't think they were terribly sure about what they were saying, and what they said was that the intelligence of an organised fight due to take place that day. And I got in touch with some guys I know involved with Hibs, because they're involved in some other fan collectives at the moment, and they kind of laughed at that suggestion. It's like absolutely categorically not true whatsoever, and no idea where such intelligence could possibly have come. And again, part of my point was that if you're arguing that that these powers are the last resort, yet you've either kettled fans or threatened to kettle fans on these occasions that you've had those powers, then it kind of contradicts that idea that they're being used as a last resort and you don't actually want to use them. So I think there were a lot of contradictions in what was held by the police, and as I say, my frustration looking back, and the meeting at the time as well, but particularly looking back, was how little input or how little interest Celtic had in sort of either pointing out those contradictions or really questioning any of it.
Yeah, that was something that when I read you kind of informed us straight away what happened. Now, for this, I had a wee look, and I'll see if I've got it open in front of me. So when Celtic reported the Fairhurst inquiry results on the website, they spoke about the 10 identified questions from the information received, 5 of which have been noted as relevant. And one of them, it basically, did Celtic and Police Scotland collaborate on the subject of supporter detentions and pre-planning? Absolutely not. Celtic had no knowledge or involvement in this police operation. Was Celtic made aware at any prior stage to the police operations taking place? At no time was Celtic. Now, you touched on that earlier, and the fact that Celtic have said, we have got questions. Was there at no point did Celtic interject during this? Did they basically just make you the fucking fall guy for it? Know what I mean?
I don't think Celtic wanted me to be the fall guy. I don't think Celtic wanted
you there at all.
There at all, aye. They did run through the kind of 10 questions, but never, again, to the best of my recollection, because it was just me in there, I was trying to take notes. As soon as I came out, you're right, Scott, I left, I think, a 16-minute long voice note. Trying to remember as much, partly because I was, my head I'd kept myself composed as long as I could in the meeting, and then when I came out, I maybe let a little bit of that steam.
You went to town, aye.
But as soon as I done that, and then I was heading to do something else work-wise, and I was just typing up everything that I could remember, so that I could organise it into some form of overview of minutes. And one point as well that I had to make in the minutes is when we were putting them together was, I think that was broadly the order, but again, because I was being pulled from pillar to post arguing these points, it wasn't like for example, when the collective met the club and they had, one of their representatives taking minutes, so did we, and we could agree almost every single point. It wasn't like that because I'm trying to firefight with three Poles who are very, very unhappy at it being questioned and being very defensive in how they dealt with it. Celtic are sort of sitting mute, not really doing much at all. I'm trying to make sure they're also held to account for the fact that they're not doing enough to stand up for their own supporters, and trying to kind of take notes and try and reflect as honestly and accurately as I can. But in terms of like Celtic's whole thing really was, and Michael Nicholson did pull it back a little bit when we were when me and some of the police officers were going back and forth, but his thing was continually trying to pull it back onto the kind of order of the questions, and trying to focus on that. But to the best of my memory, at no point did Police Scotland say something that Celtic really tried to push them on, or question or kind of look to explore in any meaningful way. And I think had I not been there, but had there not been a supporter rep there who was kind of willing and able to do that, that type of conversation simply would not have taken place.
Definitely. It does lead me to think, how would Celtic have dealt with this in terms? See, imagine you weren't there. How would so? I think we're all kind of agreed sitting here, the new, and anybody who's listened to this or read it, that you've kind of been a fly in the ointment a wee bit here, ain't you? You've kind of come into something you're not invited to, and you've upset the apple cart. But I even wonder how Celtic would present this meeting, the results of this meeting, if they even would. Because there's nothing came for Celtic so far, and about this coming for us.
So Celtic's Michael Nicholson's I will obviously come to the back end of the meeting when I kind of attempted to kind of turn back towards Celtic to ask them to take responsibility and stand up for their supporters and take a position. But Michael Nicholson's line, and I think he reiterated it at a couple of different points, his line was, this is an ongoing conversation. So, it's not that they had the report and that would allow them to take a position. It's not that they didn't have the meeting and that would allow them to take a position. Mm-hmm. It's an ongoing conversation, and they'll sort of come back to us, whenever. And if you remember, Scott, you have read it as well, Jason, no doubt. See, when the collective met with the Celtic board, at the beginning of October, one of the questions, for example, was about the kind of summer transfer window, and specifically there were questions about what lessons have been learned. What do you think went well, what didn't? Have you done a kind of review of what occurred, and will we kind of get any? Can you tell us what you've learned and what you action from here on? And Michael Nicholson and Chris Mackay, I'm sure, both came out, and their point was that they would have after every transfer window, they would have a standard review of all those things, what didn't, what they learned from it. At that point, which was over a month later after the window had shut, they still hadn't done it, but they were planning to do it, and they would come back and let us know. Well, now in December, and they've not come back to us about any of that, and it was, for me, it was quite similar in the sense of, this is an ongoing thing. We'll keep checking, we'll keep discussing it, and then we'll maybe come back to you. We'll maybe make it. We'll maybe, But as I say, they're kind of, for me, their tactic is typically playing for time, waiting till it fizzles out, and hoping that they can move on. Because one thing we know about this board is that they are allergic to any degree of transparency and accountability.
100% agree. 100. They're just no fit for purpose. It's absolutely wild. It's like trying to get blood out of stone, And as you say, you're in that meeting and you're expecting them to have an opinion on something, and just to sit there like mutes and let you bat off everything and try and put your point across on behalf of Celtic supporters, and they just sit there and say absolutely nothing.
see in some sense as well, like I even had more respect for them if they were saying, you know, well, Paul, you can see there is a knife there.
Aye, a bit of dialogue.
Even if they said, you know, like whatever it was, like I could have more respect for someone who just sees things a different way from me. That's fine. I might not like it, I might not agree with it.
Mm-hmm.
I expect it's a kind of human reaction to, you know, like circumstances we're watching with our eyes. The idea of sort of watching this, you know, not only having seen, no doubt, footage, received, you know, a rake of fan emails, complaints, no doubt had a direct report from their own supporter liaison officer, John Paul Taylor, about what happened in the day, then commissioned a report, then read that report, and then listened to, you know, I've been part of a kind of 2-hour back and forth between me and you know, the fan representatives and representatives of Police Scotland, to still be sitting and saying, I've got nothing to say in this, I don't have any comment to make. I find that position much more difficult to have any real respect for.
I totally agree.
Right. I think we've done well there. I think we've got everything we were looking for. I've got one final. I don't, J-Bo, you get in kind of last.
No. Many thanks to Paul for explaining.
I've got one more before I let you go, Paul. Now, you said, did you actually say at the meeting that you would rather Celtic opposed this in the future going? Did you actually suggest that?
I did. So towards the end, right? So we did get into a bit of discussion as well about how people were treated within the kettle. Again, the police were very adamant of that one officer specifically said he's never been more proud of his colleagues, which is just ridiculous, just ludicrous stuff. You know what I mean? Like pathetic, to be honest. And it was funny because one thing the police kept saying was, we're here to listen, we're here to take accountability. But when they were actually asked to take any accountability for the behaviour of their officers, they utterly refused to do so. So it was frustrating. And again, we can get into that. One thing as well, I do want to note, just because it was missed out, the meeting notes, partly just because I forgot, as I say, like there was so much going on, it was difficult to remember every element of it. One thing that was discussed as well was that people had tried to pass in provisions, so people had tried to hand stuff in to fans, and the police had actively rejected it. And the police, when asked about it, said that they couldn't remember, they didn't know if that had happened, and then said actually that might have been because we were going to hand out water of our own. That's why people maybe weren't allowing cans of brew and juice and things like that into people. But when we were kind of coming to the end, one thing I was kind of keen to do was to push Celtic. I did ask Michael Nicholson directly, do you think after what we've heard, what we've spoke about, after all of this stuff, do you think that the police behaved in a way that was lawful and appropriate? At which point, Paul, this is an ongoing conversation. We can't get blah, 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 right? And then at that point, I did say, is that one thing that I would like is for the club to take that position of the default when they are notified in any way, formal, informal, a passing comment, whatever. If they are notified that an application is going to go in to allow police section 60 powered ahead of any Celtic match, their default position should be to oppose it unless they are met with specific overwhelming evidence that is required. Again, no comment was mentioned. And then the last thing was around the police. So again, one of the things that we've not even really discussed is that fans were, searched. It's in the meeting notes, so we don't need to cover it in too much depth. But when fans were searched, they had sunglasses, they had hats, they had scarves, they had keffiyehs taken off them. And one of the things that, and I kind of made the point of all the record that fans have got of people who had stuff taken off them, nobody has received anything back. And the police officer at that point said, we're sorry, they did say that they would, and I was like, well, fans should get that back with a kind of letter of apology, to which they agreed. And then when I was asking a little bit as well, part of the Section 60 powers themselves mean that if a fan is stopped and searched, they have to be given a receipt with a reference number for that specific action. That's part of, the kind of policy that exists around it. And that didn't happen for the vast majority of fans. Most fans weren't given a receipt, they weren't given a reference number. And then when I asked the police officer, well, what happened, and he said, oh, look, I'm really sorry, that was a logistical issue, and that's something that we'll learn from. And then he said, but it's okay because we issued them retrospectively. And I was a bit like, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? And he was like, we sent them out. And I was like, well, how did you send them out? And he was like, well, we had the details of the fans to be searched. And I was like, but again, part of the law around this is that you're not allowed to demand names and addresses of those people who are not just supporters, but anyone under Section 60 who you're stopping and searching with those powers. You're not allowed to demand those pieces of information. So why do you have them? And he said, oh, well, fans just voluntarily gave us them. And I was like, but the witness statements are telling us that fans have said they were threatened with arrest or threatened that they won't get out the kettle unless they give those details. And again, police were saying, no, that wasn't the case. So it brings me back to kind of a broader point around one thing that the police really, I think really they couldn't get over was this idea of fans being non-compliant with them. Fans not just doing what they were told and submitting a search, or fans who maybe weren't members of the Green Brigade or around the ultra scene who didn't just leave the kettle, who didn't just abandon people to the kind of whims of Police Scotland, and he couldn't understand why, they were getting very frustrated at the idea that people weren't doing exactly as the police had told them. And the kind of point I was making was that you've got a situation here whereby, these powers appear to be applied for on the basis of an incident in an entirely different context to this one. You then operationalise those powers on the basis of footage that I think most people, if you've seen them, didn't really show very much, certainly not anything different from what occurs at that game most weeks in terms of maybe a bit of pyro. You've then kettled and corralled fans, and when you've been searching them, you've not adhered to the legislation. When you've taken stuff off them, you've not given it back to them. And these, as I say, Celtic fans have got a kind of imprinted memory of what it's like to be treated, or how fans can and have been treated by Police Scotland. It's like, it shouldn't take a genius to work out why fans don't trust you. It shouldn't take a genius to work out why fans feel a responsibility to kind of look after each other in these set of circumstances. And that doesn't make them a criminal. That doesn't make them a hooligan. It doesn't make them a threat to public order. It just makes them a kind of human being showing a little bit of solidarity with a fellow supporter. And I think they really struggled to, I don't know if it was struggled to understand, or if they just loathe the idea of people not heeding their authority. Yeah. But again, it really spoke to me about the way that they see the relationship between supporters and police. We are, in essence, potential criminals, and our only duty when engaging with them is to do exactly what we're told when we're told. And this broader and again, one thing that if Michael Nicholson's whole thing was, this is an ongoing conversation because we want to improve engagement and improve trust. Nothing that occurred on that day improved trust between Police Scotland and football supporters, and nothing that has occurred since around how they've reflected on it, how they've commented on it, how they've engaged with anyone on it has improved things either. And for me, I'll be honest, see if the meeting was just with Police Scotland, I definitely wouldn't have went, right, because my experience of, I'd never met the police like this before, but my experience of being around, football fans and the Fat campaign and whatever, is that you're not going to get that far trying to reason with the police, right, around this type of thing. And I think it'd be a waste of our energy trying to do so. what I was hoping was that our club could have been in some way moved, even just an inch, towards trying to do a bit more to defend its supporters. And so far they've refused to do it. That's what I feel let down about. I'm not shocked by the police and you know, they need to be held to account and whatever, but that doesn't surprise me. That's who they are, that's what they are, that's what they'll do. But our club has a responsibility to stand up for its own supporters. It's a responsibility to keep us all safe in every sense of the word. And as I say, even if that as I say, like, simply taking a position on this, all this time later, after all the evidence that's been gathered, is the absolute bare minimum that we should be able to expect. But unfortunately, because relations are at such certainly in my Celtic supporting lifetime, are at an all-time low. And I think the fact that they can't even do this for us, it tells you, again, it comes back to what we spoke about, like we were right at the start, which is they hold us in nothing but contempt.
Yeah. In my experience, I can only ever remember Celtic sticking up for the fans once, and that was because Brian Reid's boy got fucking lamped. If you remember, no Brian Reid, Brian Quinn. That was the only time I ever remember him standing up for us, because fucking one of their boys got walloped. But we'll finish with that. J-Boy, you get anything else to add?
No, that was great, Paul. Thanks very much.
On behalf of all the Celtic supporters, Paul, and I know that you're squirming when I'm doing it, on behalf of us all, thank you very much for going to that meeting. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you for coming on and giving us your time tonight and kind of going through it all again. Now, if you want to follow the Celtic Fans Collective, we're on Twitter and we are at CFC_collective, and we've just this evening posted up Paul's own minutes from the meeting if you want to kind of go and have a wee look at them. And again, if you've got any ideas, you kind of want to help out, you want to join a subgroup, you can also contact us on that same Twitter account, or if you wanted, you could stick us a wee email to celticfanscollective@gmail.com. But I'll finish off. J-Bo, thanks for coming on and giving me your time. And once again, Paul, thank you very much for your time, pal.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, mate. I appreciate it, Scott.
Cheers, boys.
You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials, because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by Xerox in 4 parts without commercial interruptions. The revolution will not show you pictures of Nixon blowing a bugle and leading a charge by John Mitchell, General Abrams, and Spyro Agnew to eat hog maws confiscated from a Harlem sanctuary. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by the Schaefer Award Theater and will not star Natalie Woods and Steve McQueen or Bullwinkle and Julia. The revolution will not give your mouth sex appeal. The revolution will not get rid of the nubs. The revolution will not make you look 5 pounds thinner, because the revolution will not be televised, brother. There will be no pictures of you and Willie Mae pushing that shopping cart down the block on the dead run, or trying to slide that color TV into a stolen ambulance. NBC will not be able to predict the winner at 8:32 on report from 29 districts. The revolution will not be televised. There will be no pictures of pigs shooting down brothers on the instant replay. There will be no pictures of pigs shooting down brothers on the instant replay. There will be no pictures of Whitney Young being run out of Harlem on a rail with a brand new process. There will be no slow motion or still lights of Roy Wilkins strolling through Watts in a red, black, and green liberation jumpsuit that he has been saving for just the proper occasion. Green Acres, Beverly Hillbillies, and Hooterville Junction will no longer be so damn relevant, and women will not care if Dick finally got down with Jane on Search for Tomorrow, because black people will be in the street looking for a brighter day. The revolution will not be televised. There will be no highlights on the 11 o'clock news and no pictures of Harry armed women liberationists and Jackie Onassis blowing her nose. The theme song will not be written by Jim Webb or Francis Scott Keys, nor sung by Glenn Campbell, Tom Jones, Johnny Cash, Engelbert Humperdinck, or The Rare Earth. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be right back after a message about a white tornado, white lightning, or white people. You will not have to worry about a dove in your bedroom, the tiger in your tank, or the giant in your toilet bowl. The revolution will not go better with Coke. The revolution will not fight germs that may cause bad breath. The revolution will put you in the driver's seat. The revolution will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised. The revolution will be no rerun, brothers. The revolution will be live.